Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. The Ministry of Home Affairs has decided to extend the nationwide lockdown by a couple of weeks till the 17th of May. And by using its powers under the Disaster Management Act of 2005, the MHA has issued a revised set of guidelines that would be applicable in the third phase of the lockdown. These revised set of guidelines provide for a different set of restrictions and relaxations based on the color-coded classification of districts as identified by the Union Health Ministry. Based on the rate of new infections, doubling rate, recovery rate and the formation of clusters, the Union Health Ministry has divided the 700 odd districts into the red zone, green zone and the orange zone. The Health Ministry has identified around 130 hotspot districts and it has placed them under the red zone, and another 284 districts where the spread of the infection has more or less been brought under control have been placed under the orange zone. Then the rest 319 districts which have not seen any new cases in the last 21 days have been declared as green zones. Under the revised guidelines, a different set of restrictions and relaxations will be applicable in these three zones, and within the red and the orange zone, active clusters have been identified as containment zones where the strictest of restrictions would be applied. One of the key features of the revised guidelines is that the Union Home Ministry has made the Arogya Setu app mandatory for residents in the containment zone and as well as for employees in both public and private sector units. The local administration in containment zones has been directed to ensure 100% coverage of Arogya Setu app in order to facilitate contact tracing of infected patients and establish perimeter control in order to strictly enforce quarantine measures. Then apart from this, the Indian Railways, which has brought its passenger trains to a complete standstill for more than a month, has decided to launch a special train service known as Shramik Specials. These on-demand trains will be run based on requests received from the state governments in order to transport those who have been stranded as a result of the lockdown back to their home states. These Shramik special trains are expected to benefit migrant workers who have been stranded in their host states, and it is also expected to benefit tourists, pilgrims and students who had been stranded for more than a month as a result of the lockdown. These trains will be run by the Indian Railways based on requests received from the state governments, and the cost of the tickets would be entirely borne by the state governments. Now let's take up an editorial from page number 6, which helps us understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown on the core sectors of the Indian economy. See, as far as the industrial economy of the country is concerned, 8 sectors have been identified as the core sectors. This includes coal, crude oil, natural gas, petroleum refinery products, fertilizers, steel, cement and electricity. These 8 sectors have been identified as the core sectors because the larger economy is directly dependent on them. Be it agriculture, be it manufacturing or be it services, they are all directly dependent on these 8 core sectors. So in order to measure the performance of these 8 core sectors, the Government of India has a dedicated index known as the Index of 8 Core Industries or the ICI. This index is a part of the larger industrial index, that is the IIP or the Index of Industrial Production. This Index of Core Industries measures the performance of these 8 core sectors both collectively and as well as individually. It is basically a production volume index that measures the volume of production in a given month, and the index is published on a monthly basis. But please remember that the index is always published with a lag of 1 month. That is, the index for the month of March is published at the end of April. This key index is brought out by the Office of the Economic Advisor under the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, which is under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. The Index of Core Industries has been aligned with the larger index, that is IIP, by bringing its base year in alignment with that of the IIP. So both the indices have the same base year, that is 2011-2012. And within the IIP, the Index of 8 Core Industries enjoys a weight of 40.27%. So the index of 8 core industries for the month of March which was published in the last week of April, has registered a sharp decline of 6.5%, and this happens to be the steepest fall in core sector output in the last 8 years since the new base year was introduced in 2011-2012. This decline in the output of 8 core sectors is directly attributed to the pandemic and the lockdown because it has caused a sharp fall in demand which has affected production volume and the cash flow in these 8 core sectors. For example, if you look at the electricity sector, according to the National Load Dispatch Center, there has been a 9% decline in demand for electricity in the month of March. This sharp decline in demand is mainly because of the decline in commercial demand. Because see, the lockdown has actually increased the domestic demand for electricity. As more and more people are confined to their homes, the domestic demand for electricity has definitely gone up. But the closure of malls, restaurants, commercial centers, industrial units and factories has resulted in a sharp fall in commercial demand for electricity. Such a sudden drop in demand can affect cash flow to the distribution companies which are already under severe financial stress. This example shows that the performance of these 8 core sectors is going to have a cascading effect or a domino effect on the larger economy. Then if you look at the construction sector, the production volume in the 8 core sectors is directly dependent on it. But the lockdown has more or less brought the construction sector to a complete standstill, and this is having a direct impact on the production volume of these 8 core sectors. The disruption caused to construction activities by the lockdown and the unavailability of laborers has directly affected output in the steel, cement and electricity sector. Similarly, if you look at the volatility in global oil markets, it is having a direct impact on the crude oil, natural gas and refinery sector. If this was the case in the month of March, when the lockdown was implemented only in the last week, then we can expect a much larger decline in the index of 8 core industries for the month of April when the lockdown was implemented for the entire month. So this data helps us understand that different sectors of the economy are interdependent on each other. It also helps us understand that it is much easier to bring the economy to a standstill by imposing a lockdown than restarting the economy. Because restarting the economy will require multiple sectors to function smoothly. And due to the interdependency of different sectors, the economy cannot be completely restarted unless and until the lockdown has been completely lifted. So for the coming months, that is for May, June, July, we can definitely expect a much bigger contraction in the index of 8 core industries. And the only way for the government to revive the economy and restart the economy would be to significantly increase public spending, especially in the infrastructure sector. Because if the infrastructure sector is kick-started with massive public spending, then it will automatically kickstart the 8 core sectors. Now let's take up a column from page number 6, written by M.S. Swaminathan and Nitya Rao. In this column, the writers evaluate the impact of the lockdown on the rural population, especially migrant workers, and how the lockdown is affecting their access to food security, nutritional security, and livelihood security. See, under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, the central government has announced additional allocation of food grains through the PDS, and it has also announced a few livelihood measures. Similar measures have been announced by the state governments as well. But the writers say that these measures won't be sufficient to provide food security, nutritional security and livelihood security to the rural population and the migrant workers. In this context, the writers illustrate the factors related to food security and nutritional security and how these two are dependent on job security or livelihood security. See, food security is a factor of the quantity of food that is produced in the country. If sufficient food is produced through farming, then it allows the government to ensure the food security of its citizens. In this context, the writers talk about the Green Revolution of India, which was witnessed in the 1960s and 1970s, which transformed India from ship-to-mouth existence to guaranteeing right to food as a legal right. See, in the 1960s, Indian agriculture was severely affected by famines, and its dependency on low-yield varieties and subsistence agriculture had brought down agricultural production, and as a result, it had threatened India's food security. So as a result, India's agricultural production had gone down and it had to import even basic food grains, and hence this phase of India's existence was referred to as ship to mouth existence. Then came the Green Revolution of India, which introduced high yield varieties, fertilizers and better irrigation, which transformed Indian agriculture and significantly increased the productivity of Indian agriculture. So as a result of Green Revolution, within a few decades, India not only became self-sufficient with regard to food security, but it also started to export, and it started emerging as one of the top producers of most agricultural commodities. This enabled the Indian government to ensure food security for all through the public distribution system and guarantee right to food as a legal right. There can be no better authority to speak about the success of India's Green Revolution than M.S. Swaminathan, because he himself played a key role in India's Green Revolution, and he is also referred to as the father of Green Revolution in India. M.S. Swaminathan worked very closely with Norman Borlaug, who is regarded as the father of the global Green Revolution and was even awarded the Nobel Prize for introducing high yield variety crops. So having learnt from his partnership with Norman Borlaug, M.S. Swaminathan played a key role in India's Green Revolution, and he worked with the government of India to introduce high yield variety crops and fertilizers, which led to a significant increase in agricultural production and thus helped the Indian government to ensure food security for its citizens. So this makes it clear that food security is always a factor of food production. The same logic applies for the lockdown period as well, and hence the writers are calling upon the government to ensure that food production doesn't suffer as a result of the lockdown. Because if food production is sustained, then definitely food security can also be ensured. But the lockdown is posing a number of challenges to Indian farmers and India's agricultural production. As a result of the lockdown, farmers are not able to employ labor and they're not able to access basic agricultural inputs. Because due to the lockdown, they are either unavailable or even if it is available, it is very expensive. Then upon this, the lockdown has disrupted the agricultural supply chains in the country, and it has shown that the pricing and procurement policies of the government is highly inadequate. Along with this, farmers are facing logistical challenges with regard to transportation, warehousing and cold storage facilities, which is seen to be extremely crucial for perishable agricultural produce such as fruits and vegetables. So the writers are calling upon the government to address these challenges being faced by the farmers in order to sustain food production, which in turn will help in ensuring food security. Next, the writers explain how ensuring food security alone may not guarantee nutritional security. Because nutritional security is a factor of having access to food, and this is dependent upon the purchasing power of the individual. So even if sufficient food is being produced in the country, and even if food security is being ensured by the government, unless and until the individual has sufficient purchasing power in order to access this food, nutritional security cannot be guaranteed. Since a large segment of the population lack this access and lack this purchasing power, the writers highlight the significance of food security schemes such as the National Food Security Act, which has guaranteed right to food through the PDS system. They say that the additional allocation of food grains announced under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana is not sufficient, and they are calling upon the central government and the state governments to further increase allocation under the PDS system. They also highlight the significance of midday meal scheme and Anganwadi centers in ensuring nutritional security to women and children, and how these programs have been disrupted as a result of the lockdown. Since the women and child beneficiaries of these schemes are not able to access its benefits during the lockdown, they are calling upon the government to widen the basket of food grains being allocated through the PDS. They say that nutritional security can be ensured during the lockdown by providing for a higher allocation under the PDS, because the lockdown has resulted in the closure of schools and Anganwadi centers, and this has disrupted the provision of nutritional security which was being delivered through programs such as the midday meal programs. The lockdown has even reduced the access of people to nutritious food because it has reduced their purchasing power. So according to the writers, even though food production can ensure food security, nutritional security cannot be ensured due to lack of access and due to the disruption in government programs, and hence the allocation under PDS has to be increased further. Then finally, the writers illustrate how food security and nutritional security are dependent on job security or livelihood security of the citizens. In order to ensure livelihood security to rural people and migrant workers during the lockdown, the writers are calling upon the government to focus on value addition industries or food processing industries which add value to primary agricultural products. To illustrate this point, they take the example of the rice biopark in Myanmar. At this biopark, the bran, the straw, and the entire biomass of the paddy crop is utilized to make different products, and this has ended up creating thousands of jobs. The writers are also asking the government to draw lessons from the Amul cooperative model, which revolutionized India's dairy sector. They are also asking the government to expand the ambit and coverage of the Manrega scheme in order to provide livelihood opportunities to migrant workers who are returning back home during the lockdown period, and also to create job opportunities for rural women. So in short, this column helps us understand how livelihood security and non-food factors such as transportation, logistics, storage, etc. can have an impact on food security, nutritional security, and the health security of the citizens. Next, we have another column on page number 6 written by Taiwan's health minister, in which he explains Taiwan's strategy in successfully containing the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. He illustrates how Taiwan has learnt its lessons from the SARS outbreak of 2003 and how it has harnessed technology to successfully contain the spread of the pandemic, even though Taiwan is located in close geographical proximity to China, which was the epicenter of the pandemic. So this Taiwan model is quite similar to the South Korean model or the Singapore model, which we have discussed over the last few months. So I would request you to go through this column once. Now let's take up an article from page number 11. The government of Kuwait has offered to airlift Indian citizens, especially Indian workers and illegal migrants who have been stranded in Kuwait as a result of the lockdown and suspension of flights. This article helps us understand the plight of the Indian diaspora that resides and works in the Gulf countries during this pandemic. See, in the Gulf countries, close to 9 million Indian migrant workers are employed, and most of them have taken up blue-collar jobs, that is low-paying, low-skilled jobs in the construction sector, oil refining sector, etc. Amongst these migrant workers, a number of them are illegal migrants as well. These Indian migrant workers already face very harsh working and living conditions in the Gulf countries, and their situation has been further complicated due to the lockdown and the suspension of flights. So the pandemic has caused a lot of distress to these Indian migrant workers. But for the time being, the Indian government has made it clear that it is not in a position to evacuate these Indians as a result of the lockdown. So the government of Kuwait and recently the government of UAE have communicated to the government of India that they are willing to freely airlift Indian workers, especially illegal migrants. And this proposal has the potential to further strain India's relations with the Gulf countries, and as well as to cause further distress to Indian workers in these countries. See, the Gulf countries have also come under a lot of stress as a result of the pandemic because it has caused volatility in the global oil markets, which is the lifeline of these Gulf economies. And they are also concerned that migrant workers might end up spreading the pandemic in their countries. So as a result of this economic crisis and the fear of the pandemic, Kuwait and UAE have offered to freely airlift stranded Indian citizens, especially workers and illegal migrants. Recently, India's relations with the Gulf countries has come under a lot of strain due to a social media campaign which went viral, alleging that Islamophobia in India is threatening the rights of the Muslim community in the country. Upon this, concerns related to the stranded Indian citizens could also have an impact on the relationship. So if the well-being of the Indian diaspora in the Gulf countries continues to be affected because of the pandemic, then India might very well be staring at the possibility of carrying out a massive evacuation on its own. Because see, Kerala, which is the largest source of Indian migrant workers in the Gulf countries, has opened a website for non-Keralites, and already more than 5 lakh people have registered and have expressed their willingness to be evacuated back to India. So if the lockdown and the suspension of flights continues for any longer duration, then India might very well be staring at the possibility of carrying out the largest evacuation ever. Because till date, the largest airlift executed by India was during the Gulf War in 1990. When Iraq under Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, India had to evacuate close to 1.7 lakh to 1.9 lakh Indians from Kuwait and Jordan. And this happens to be the largest airlift that has been organized by India. And organizing such a large-scale evacuation can be a logistical nightmare for any government. Over the last 2 decades, India has carried out many such large-scale evacuations involving thousands of Indian citizens from conflict zones such as Yemen, Libya, Lebanon, Egypt, etc. During the COVID-19 pandemic, India has evacuated hundreds of its nationals from affected countries such as China, Italy, and Iran. But the crisis that is brewing in the Gulf countries would be unprecedented, because if the pandemic continues to affect the Gulf countries, and if the lockdown and the suspension of flights continues in India, then India might be forced to evacuate lakhs and lakhs of its citizens, making it a logistical nightmare for the Indian government. According to reports, such contingency plans are already being drawn up by the Ministry of External Affairs, the Indian Air Force, the Indian Navy, and Air India, and as well as the Ministry of Civil Aviation. Now let's take up an article from page number 16. Kashmir saffron has been provided with the GI tag or the geographical indication tag by the GI registry. See, the GI tag is accorded to those products whose uniqueness or quality is tied to its geographical origin. That is, if the place of origin makes a product unique and if it accords it a unique quality, then such a product can be given the GI tag. For example, the silk from Kanjivaram, the toys from Nirmal, etc. So like this, geographical indication is a part of the global IPR regime or the intellectual property rights regime, and it is protected under WTO's trade related aspects of intellectual property rights or TRIPS. When such a GI tag is given to a product, it helps in protecting the brand and preventing counterfeits. It also helps in securing a market for people from this geographical region who are responsible for ensuring the unique quality of the product. And for the customer as well, it serves as an assurance of quality and provides him a reasonable price and keeps him away from fake products. So such a GI tag has been accorded to Kashmir saffron, which is a popular spice that is cultivated in the Karevas or highlands of Jammu and Kashmir. It is predominantly grown in the Pulwama, Budgam, Kishtwar and Srinagar districts of J&K. See, saffron is basically the stigma that is collected from a flower known as saffron crocus or the Crocus sativus. Once it is collected and dried, it becomes a very popular coloring agent and as well as a popular spice. There is a huge global demand for this spice and it fetches a very high price. Iran happens to be the largest producer of saffron. India happens to be a very close competitor to Iran, and almost the entire production of saffron in India comes from Jammu and Kashmir. This popular and highly valued spice finds numerous applications, and it is used in traditional cuisines, it is used in cosmetics, it is also said to have medicinal properties, and it has become an integral part of Kashmiri culture. Now let's take up the practice questions. In India, which of the following fall under direct taxes? Is it income tax or corporate tax or capital gains tax or service tax? Amongst the given options, the correct answer is option B, 1, 2 and 3 only. Because see, service tax is a type of indirect tax, whereas income tax, corporate tax and capital gains tax, they are all examples of direct taxes. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 1, direct tax revenues has actually defied the lockdown restrictions and it has increased by 36.6% in the month of April. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Bannerghatta Biological Park is located in Mysore and was carved out of the Bannerghatta National Park. The biological park is an example of ex situ conservation, whereas the national park is an example of in situ conservation. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect. So option B is the right answer. See, the Bannerghatta Biological Park and the Bannerghatta National Park are located on the outskirts of Bengaluru and not in Mysore. See, a biological park is basically a zoological park where ex situ conservation is practiced. It is basically off-site conservation. Here the threatened species is brought outside its habitat, that is its natural habitat, and conserved and protected in a controlled habitat such as a zoo or a biological park. On the other hand, a national park or a wildlife sanctuary is an example for in situ conservation or on-site conservation, where the threatened species are conserved and protected within their natural habitat. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 5, animals in the Bannerghatta Biological Park are being offered for adoption. Now let's take up the next practice question. The functioning of India's Enforcement Directorate and Financial Intelligence Unit is based on the standards laid down by which international organization? The correct answer is option C, the Financial Action Task Force. See, the FATF primarily deals with money laundering and terrorist financing. It lays down global standards which has to be followed by the member countries, and accordingly, India has adopted the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. As per this legislation, the Enforcement Directorate and the Financial Intelligence Unit India are responsible for combating money laundering in India. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 8, Indian enforcement agencies are concerned that till date only one Lashkar terrorist has been placed in jail by Pakistan, even though the country's performance with regard to combating money laundering and terror financing is coming up for a review at the upcoming meeting of the Financial Action Task Force. Now let's take up the next practice question. The popular Thrissur Puram festival of Kerala was started by Raja Ramavarma. Option A is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 5, the popular Thrissur Puram festival is going to be held on a very low scale this year as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need for enforcing social distancing. This popular and vibrant festival, which attracts tourists from around the world, is being cancelled for the first time since its inception. But however, the authorities have allowed the basic rituals to be conducted within the temple premises with the participation of just around 5 people. So the history behind Thrissur Puram festival can be important for prelims. It is an annual Hindu festival held in the Thrissur district of Kerala. It is held at the Vadakunathan temple in Thrissur on Puram day, that is the day when the moon rises with the Puram star, according to the Malayalam calendar month of Medam. This festival was started by Raja Ramavarma of the kingdom of Cochin, who was also known as Saktan Tampuran. Now let's take up the next practice question. The Central Vista in New Delhi, comprising of crucial government buildings such as the Rashtrapati Bhavan, North Block and South Block, Parliament Building, Rajpath, India Gate, etc., were designed by Sir Edward Lutyens, Sir Herbert Baker, or Le Corbusier. The correct answer is option B, 1 and 2 only. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 8, the Expert Appraisal Committee of the Environment Ministry has granted the environmental clearance for the Central Vista project, which has already generated a lot of controversy due to its cost and design. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The main objective of the Integrated Management of Public Distribution System is to implement the idea of One Nation, One Ration Card. The scheme provides for nationwide portability for ration card holders under the National Food Security Act. It enables the migratory ration card holders or beneficiaries to lift their entitled food grains from any fair price shop of their choice in the country by obtaining a new ration card in their host state. Under this initiative, there is no added burden on any state or union territory. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect, so the correct answer is option B, 1, 2 and 4 only. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 9, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar have also decided to join the One Nation, One Ration Card scheme, and it is expected to benefit lakhs of migrant workers during this lockdown period. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2019 prelims paper. In India, the use of carbofuran, methyl parathione, phorate and trizophos is viewed with apprehension. These chemicals are used as pesticides in agriculture. Option A is the right answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, illustrate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on India's core sector output. The second question, the prolonged national lockdown to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the problems of food, nutrition, and livelihood security confronting a large number of rural people, in particular migrants to cities. Suggest possible measures that can relieve their suffering. So kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.